What's more scarce? Finding somebody that believes you when you say, trust me, babe, I'm not like the other guys. Or finding points in a fantasy draft after round 2. We'll find out. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. All right. Some of you have been asking for this. Categorical scarcity. What does it mean? We've been doing this show for years and we're back to do it again. And honestly, the pattern of these numbers hasn't changed hugely. It is a great way. Sorry, this is for category leagues. I should have stated that. Points league guys, I know that you always feel hard done by. There is more to cover in category leagues. That's why there is more shows on it. It is also the more popular format. That's also why there's more shows on it. There is a points league mock draft coming. It is coming very soon. You had a points league must draft show 2 days ago, and there is a do not draft show coming as well. There is stuff coming, trust me. But this is for category leagues. This is for category leagues. It is important to be able to understand the shape of stats in a fantasy draft. There are always going to be outliers, but as a general rule, understanding what stats are available at what point in a draft can be really useful, and how you can maybe zig against things and zag against things and punt things and all that sort of stuff when going through a draft. So we're going to look at the availability, the bountifulness, or the scarcity of each of the major categories, not turnovers, because hey, you're not drafting for big turnovers. You're drafting for smaller turnovers if that's what you're doing, which I suggest you don't. So we're not looking at the scarcity of turnovers, because the best turnover guy you get is the guy who doesn't play. So what we're looking at is the 8 categories, how you can influence your team through each different round, and just look at how that all plays out. Yeah. So let's start at the start. I used Yahoo current ADP as of October the 12th and went through and said, well, just pick those guys in order. And that's not going to be how drafts work, but it's my closest approximation. So when we go into round 2, start of round 2, 12 picks are off the board, the top 12 guys in Yahoo ADP. Those are the scarcity numbers if you are watching this over on YouTube. What does it mean? Don't worry too much about what the actual number means. A negative number on that screen means that the stat is harder to find. A positive means it is easier to find at this point. This is just to give you an idea of the scale of the differences between these categories and what you find when. So don't be too caught up in the overall number, just how it relates to the other numbers. So, as you could have expected, the hardest category to fill after round 1 is points. And I will give you the hottest of hot tips. That is the case after every single round. Points are very hard to find. The top scorers are usually in the first round. And if you get someone who is a lower 20 scorer, Tyrese Halliburton, maybe even Big Chungus himself, Nikola Jokic, you're behind the 8 ball already. There are guys dotted throughout. That's why I have that extra value. Hey, if I get Jordan Poole in round 4 and he averages 27 a night, that can actually help me recover. If I get Kyle Kuzma in round 8, he might get 24 a night. That can help me recover there. If Colin Sexton pops off, unlikely. But if he does, maybe he averages 21 in round 13. You don't get that anywhere else. It is the hardest category to find. And when you're building your team and you've got it, you'll see that your points average each round when you draft someone, what your team averages goes down and down and down and down and down because there's no big scorers that come really outside of a few isolated guys. So that scarcity number is negative 1.4. The next most rare category is assists. Tyrese Halliburton goes in round 1. Jokic and his big assists go. And this doesn't even include guys like James Harden. It doesn't include guys like Domantas Sabonis. I believe it does include LaMelo Ball as a high-level assist player, but it doesn't include Trae Young, who I believe is outside that first round. Let me just double-check that. Trae Young is a guy that you can get in round 2. But the assist players, Jokic, Doncic, Shea not really, like Halliburton, Lillard, Ball, they're all going in round 1. Second most hard category to find after round 1. I've got round 2 as the header. This is the start of round 2, is assists. So we understand this, that if you want assists and if you want points, you got to shop early and avoid the rush. You got to get in early. And you'll see how this. What I really think is the main take when you see it at the end is the shape of how these stats go and what you can wait on and where you can wait and where you really need to attack. So they are by far the hardest categories to find. By far. The next most difficult category is free throw percentage. Not surprising when Damian Lillard and Shea go in round 1. Steph's a 90% shooter. Durant's going in the first round as a very high percentage shooter. So getting someone to influence your free throw percentage category is hard as well. It's nowhere near as hard as points and assists at a negative 0.33, but it is hard. And again, that's where the value of Jordan Poole comes in, or Trae Young in round 2, being able to influence that category in a big way. The other categories that are sort of scarce are rebounds and field goal percentage, negative 0.16 and negative 0.15. The ones that are bountiful, the most bountiful category after round 1 is actually blocks. There's not huge amounts of big shot blockers. Davis is there, Embiid's okay, but all your big blocks guys, your Jarrens and Kesslers, Vic and Chet and Gaff and Duran and Williams and Jared Allen and Mobley and Pirtle, blah, blah, blah. They all come later. Blocks are available. Steals at 0.29. You're going to be shocked to know that steals, like they are with everything, they're the most up and down category. They're all over the shop. They're one of the hardest to nail down. And they're a big available category. And threes, with Steph going in round 1 and Lillard going in round 1, a lot of threes do get taken off the board, but they are still valuable later on in draft. Still able to be found later on in draft. So, after round 1, if you are down significantly in points and assists, you really need to devote resources to it to get them back. And that is why very often a team that punts points or punts assists, they don't have to chase up to grab those categories, and it enables them to have stronger squads overall. That is part of why that success exists in points and assists. But there are a lot of people that are doing those builds now, which means that if everyone starts to look at a punt assist build, that means that people don't reach up for point guards in round 3 or 4, and then those point guards push into round 4 or 5 or maybe even 6, then bringing some value back. It's all cyclical. We'll get into what happens next in a sec. Because today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get a $200 bonus bet guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's never been a better time to get in on the action, whether it's Super Bowl bets on the Dolphins or MVP bets on Tua Tagovailoa. Whatever it is, those bets and those odds, it's all over at FanDuel. You can even look at the odds for this week. Money lines, spreads, over-unders, totals, whatever it is all there. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of those betting options, as I said. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. Let's look what happens after 24 players are off the board in round 3. I've added some little handy-dandy arrows next to the numbers to show you which way they're trending. Points becomes more scarce after round 2. Trae goes off the board, as we said. Kyrie, Anthony Edwards, Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell, all your high scorers, LeBron, they're gone after round 2, according to ADP data. They're off the board. So, it gets harder and harder. It actually becomes a little bit easier to get assists, marginally. The value of assists, because there's not huge assist guys. There is Trae Young really as the major guy with big assists in that round. So it gets a little bit easier to get assists, but nothing's super easy. What else do we have trending here? It became harder to get free throws. losing Mikal Bridges, losing Trae Young in that round, losing Jimmy Butler in round 2. He's got an ADP as a round 2 player. Threes became a little bit more scarce. We knew threes were pretty solid early on, but they fall away now. The availability of rebounds improves. The availability of blocks improves. The availability of steals decreases. Steals were abundant. And then, when Jimmy Butler goes off the board, Anthony Edwards goes off the board, Jaren Jackson's a good steals guy. When these guys go off the board in that round, then that drops that down. And field goal percentage becomes a little bit easier to get as well. Again, you lose some of the lower efficiency players or the lower field goal players. Not that they're low, but your high volume Mitchells, Bookers, Edwards, Trays, those guys go off. So boosting your field goal percentage can be done a little bit easier later on in the draft. After 3 rounds of done, what changes? Well, again, it becomes harder again to get points. Harder again to get points. A slight improvement in assists, not big. Threes become a little bit harder to get. Rebounds stay the same. Steals become harder to get. Steals are now moved into a negative category, so meaning they've moved from average into being more scarce. Blocks, after 3 rounds, are very available. That is going to change very quickly. Free throw percentage, negative 0.49. That's a pretty big number. It's getting harder and harder to get free throw percentage, but the same degree of, or the same order we're looking at. Points, assists, free throws haven't really changed in terms of what is hardest to get. Blocks have become the easiest. Field goal percentage is pretty easy. Rebounds is relatively easy because we see so many guards and wings go in round 3. And that is all about to change once you head into round 4. So, what do we take out of those 3 rounds? Again, if you want those assists and points and free throw percentage, you've got to do it in these rounds because they all start to fly off, like your Garlands and Van Vliets will start to go here. Some of them will leak through to round 4, maybe DeJounte Murray, Jamal Murray, some other Murray, someone else will go in that area. Your free throw percentage, DeMar DeRozan, will he go in round 3 or round 4? There are a few options, but the general trend is that they still remain really hard. Rebounds, blocks, and field goals after 3 rounds are the easier category to go and get based on ADP. Like I said, that will not last because once you are 4 rounds in, blocks has one of the biggest drops ever. Round 4 is the Miles Turner, it's maybe Walker Kessler, it's maybe Chet, it's maybe Wemby. So many blocks guys go off the board. Your rebounds, they become more scarce. Your field goal percentage becomes more scarce. It's still more abundant, but those things dropped. So that's when your bigs start to come off the board. So while I can be against Jaren Jackson at the end of the first round, start of the second, if you're getting a Jaren Jackson in round 2, you're getting ahead of the curve in getting blocks and rebounds and field goals, and he helps in other areas, all that sort of stuff. Not a great field goal percentage guy. Or if you want to reach up a little bit early, you can be ahead of the curve in getting those guys, and then people start chasing in rounds 3, round 4 to get some big men, and you can be doing other things in that area. Getting ahead of the curve, it can be important. It does become a little bit easier to get assists and to get free throw percentage after round 4 because a lot of the bad Claxton, another one of those guys, the bad free throw percentage players, the bad assist players tend to go in round 4. So the general availability remains. Still though, the most difficult category to find is points. The second is assists, and the third is free throw percentage. That remains the same. The availability of steals increased, and that is getting close to being the most available. The most available currently is field goal percentage after 4 rounds. After 6 rounds, the ability to get points gets even harder. Assists are becoming a little bit easier. We're sort of neglecting assists in this zone of a draft. Threes became easier, but after 5 rounds, so this is the start of round 6, rebounds have turned from a category that was available to one that is not really. It has dropped way down. In fact, rebounds now, after 5 rounds, is more of a rare commodity than influencing free throw percentage. And they were miles off earlier on. The availability of blocks actually increased. Field goal percentage dropped way down because this is the DeAndre Ayton, Nikola Vucevic sort of range as well, where they are not blocks guys, but field goals and rebounds players. And that drops the value down of the availability of those categories. It's still points as the number one most difficult, and assists, they are miles ahead of everybody else. They are still very, very difficult to find, and that's not really at a point of changing. But we're seeing some of the shape of these things change. 6 rounds in. Interesting here, the availability of points increased slightly. Now, it is still far and away the hardest thing to get by factors of 2, 3. Like, it's miles ahead. But it did get a little bit easier. Threes became a little bit more scarce. Assists became a little bit more scarce. Steals became a little bit more scarce. And then in round 6, not as many centers go. So a little bit more availability of blocks, of field goal percentage, and rebounds as we reach into those Durans and Williams and Gaffords who go in round 8, round 9. And you'll see that once we get to that, then we see big changes in those categories. That's not the right word. Those categories as well. So we're 7 rounds in. 84 players are gone. We are beginning round 8. It has never been harder to find points. It's a negative 1.73. Big number. Of course, assists are second at negative 0.9. And then the next hardest category after 84 picks is threes. Why is that? Well, guys like Jalen Green go off the board. Guys like Klay Thompson go off the board, who are obviously big volume 3-point shooters. Tyler Hero's gone. Anthony Simons is gone. Buddy Hield goes in that range as well. So a bunch of Michael Ponder Jr. goes in that area. A bunch of high volume threes guys go in round 7 before pick 84, dropping the threes, which are an abundant category, into one that's not as easy to get. And then after threes, it becomes free throw percentage. So it's all guard stats. So we've got a little bit of value with a bump in availability of blocks, field goal percentage, steals, and rebounds. But as we know, from 84 to 96, you're going to start to see the big man numbers disappear. This is the trend. Points, still pretty scarce, although a slight improvement. Assists, still hard to get. It became easier to get free throw percentage, but it became harder to get blocks, field goal percentage, steals, and rebounds after round 8. That is the Duran, Gafford, Williams. Who else is going in that range? Rob Williams, Valanciunas, Mitch Robinson, all those guys going around this area impact it. And that is, again, just showing the structure of how a draft or a usual draft flow goes. You can disrupt a draft flow by jumping ahead of guys or letting things fall down, and that can be to your benefit. But understanding how a general draft flow looks is important to note. What can I get? Where can I get them? Who are the guys available? After 9 rounds, points actually become a little bit easier to get because a few low scorers go. You see in round 9, maybe a Herb Jones goes off the board. Some of those centers like Duran and Williams and Gafford and that have gone. Draymond goes, these lower scoring players. So the availability of points and threes after 9 rounds is improved. So have steals and assists, but your rebounds, blocks, field goals have all dropped. Another big man round in that area. It's still by far the hardest to get points. It is second hardest to get assists, but now it's almost impossible to get rebounds. Rebounds are very close, not very close, but they are getting as close as we've seen any category to being next to assists and points. So after 9 rounds, 108 picks, your rebound options are very limited. It goes to maybe, do I want to grab Steven Adams and deal with his poor free throw? Yeah, you might want to do it. But if you haven't got your rebounds and points and assists sorted after 9 rounds, you're in real trouble. We take the flyers on that's why I like taking the flyers on the point guards, Dunn or Keontae George or Sexton or whatever it is, or a flyer on a big like a Derek Lively or whatever it is, because that is hard to get at this point. And if they pop, it's great, because you can't really find that easily in these other areas. And then I'm only going as far as round 10 because round 11 through 13, you should be just taking chances on guys. But after the first 10 rounds are done, what are we looking at? Well, again, very, very hard to find points. Very hard to find assists, and then rebounds and assists are almost the same. So the big volume categories, points, rebounds, assists, by the time you head into that round 11 zone, they become very difficult to find. Blocks are harder to find. It's actually okay and easier to find free throws at this spot. Think the Bogdanoviches, Bojan and Bogdan. Mike Conley might be around at this point as well. Jordan Clarkson, Colin Sexton. Lots of guys who can be okay free throw players tend to be available. Gordon Hayward, around this area. Harrison Barnes. All these guys tend to be around. So when we head through 10 rounds, it's hardest to get points, assists, rebounds, then field goal percentage, and then blocks, where the more abundant categories are, the most abundant apparently is steals, it's then free throw percentage, and it is then threes. After the first 10 rounds, 120 picks in. Now this will all change if people go way off ADP and all that stuff. This just gives a general vibe of how it looks. So, let's look at each category individually and show the shape of it. The first graph we've got up there is points, and you can see on that scale starts at 0 at the top. Some of the scales are a bit off, so I apologize. But it's pretty steady. With points, it's a steady decline, a little bit of a bump towards the end. But basically, it's hard to get points after round 1 in general. It's hard to influence that category. The graph on threes is a little bit hard. It's very positive early. Threes drop off. Threes become very available through rounds 5, 6, 7. And then there's a big drop between 7 and 8. And then we can lose a lot of big volume three-pointer guys. And then it becomes easier again. So threes are easy, hard, easy, hard, easy. Understanding how the shape of things goes. Rebounds. Pretty easy. You can get rebounders early on. Well, once you're in those early rounds, the rebounds are available. And then they go. And then we get to round 5 and they start to dip. And then you look at the gigantic drop-off once you get to the end of round 9. It becomes almost impossible to get strong rebounders. So while you can sit on rebounds a little bit, I'll grab them later, you got to do something because they go. They disappear. It becomes, and I've noticed this in mock drafts, you have too probably, when you're looking in those, man, who can get me? Man, no one's giving me 4 rebounds, 5 rebounds. What's going on? That's why we like the value of taking a flyer on a Derek Lively to see if there are opportunities for him to do that. Assists. They're just scarce all the time. The scarcity of them improves. It gets a little bit easier, but don't be fooled. It's not super easy to get them. Towards the end of the draft, it is the easiest that it is to get assists, which still isn't easy, and it still is the second hardest category to find. But it is easier. There are a little bit more in terms of relativity to other categories of assists later on than there is at the start. Through a bunch of those Jazz point guards, I think Mike Conley available there. Those sort of players available late. Malik Monk even in Sacramento. Steals is a bit of a weird one too. We start off pretty positively. After round 3, they do become actually harder to find, become scarce. And then the availability of steals rises and they become quite available towards the end. I think some of that is the Thompsons being available, but steals, which do have the risk of being in a situation to, because it's so low volume and day-to-day variance makes them a weird category in general. And there is just generally a level of availability for steals towards the end of a draft. Blocks, I think that we get this. It's easier to find blocks after round 1, round 2, they're all there. Round 3, and then the drop happens and they become hard, and then you get to round 9 and they start to become much more difficult to find. So we're getting the pattern here of the big men are available, round 3, round 4, got to hit them. Then there's a little bit of a gap in the middle where you can grab some guys, and then it becomes harder again, then it becomes closer to impossible towards the end of the draft, getting closer to that points and assist type model. Field goal percentage is a little bit all over the shop. It's hard to get. Then it becomes easy to get through the middle rounds. And then those centers go and it becomes hard to get. Then we start drafting point guards and wings and it becomes easy to get. And then they all go and then it becomes tough to get again. Again, I think probably the biggest trio of correlated stats is rebounds, field goals, blocks. So it makes sense that their scarcity would follow a similar pattern because it's generally the same blokes giving you the same categories. Free throw percentage starts off as really hard to get good influences there. It does become easier and easier as it goes along because you have that proliferation of three-point shooters who, when you get to that point in the draft, some of the guys that are available are quite bad at free throws. So even if you find someone who's like 83% but on 2 attempts, when you take that player, while it might not change your free throw percentage hugely, it keeps it floating, bumps it marginally while others all take a hit. So it does become a little bit easier to find guys to help you in free throws, or at least keep it solid towards the end of the draft. And that's a constant theme. As the draft goes on, while it is difficult, and it remains difficult for 7, 8, 9 rounds to find strong enough free throw guys, relative to who else is available, free throw percentage comes a little bit easier towards the final rounds of a draft. And then if I throw all of that together, putting all of it, now you might want to pause this if you're watching on YouTube to go look at this graph to see how it all plays out. You'll see at the bottom, the blue line is points. Nothing ever comes close to points in terms of availability. And green is assists, and the only time anyone comes even remotely close is rebounds once you head into round 11. And rebounds and assists become equally scarce. But you'll see the yellow line of rebounds dropping down. You've got the light blue blocks line dropping down, the purple field goal percentage dropping down, whereas your threes and steals, they start to, and free throw percentage start to improve as it all goes along. Should you over focus on this? No, you shouldn't. But what you should be doing is just having an idea of when the general concept of players go. It's why when I talk about guys and values and rankings, and when we get into late drafts of why I say, hey, there might be 30 spots of difference based on nothing. It's about trying to get the right guys at the right point. So overall value, which in a general sense is a bullshit concept in a category league fantasy situation. It doesn't really mean that much. It's about when someone's available, what stats are available, how you're getting them. Can you wait on this and get someone sort of equivalent later on? Maybe. All this goes into your thought process. All of it needs to go in. And that is how you end up becoming a better fantasy player, by understanding the ebbs and flows of a draft. And this general pattern is usually what happens. This season, the blocks are a little bit more aggressively concentrated into rounds 4 and 5, but the usual thing is assists go 2 and 3, blocks, rebounds 4 and 5, rebounds tank completely after round 10, and your free throws and threes tend to rise as it goes on. And steals are, absolutely all over the place. That's how it usually goes. So I hope you got something out of this. I think you will. If you're able to understand the data, and if you're able to just understand it's another tool that you've got. It's not the be-all and end-all. It doesn't dictate everything that you do, but it is just something to understand that when you're sitting there in round 3 and you're going, well, do I grab a blocks guy now? Because if you don't grab it round 3, and if you don't have a pick again to the end of round 4, you might start to get in trouble, and they might fall away. If you don't get your rebounds and you're not solid in rebounds by round 8, well, you're running out of chances to do it. And if you don't get points in round 1, you might as well consider punting it, unless you are specifically targeting a high points player in every round, which you can do. Poole, DeRozan, Kuzma, even Wiggins maybe a bit later on could be considered one of those guys. But you've got to be really specific about what you're doing, and that can lead to the detriment of other categories. Follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher. Not Stitcher, you dumb. Spotify. And on the Odyssey app. And on YouTube, thumb it up and leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.